Class. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is another episode of the 757 Renaissance Man Podcast. I am your host, Sean Connors. And with me, I have a very distinguished gentleman with me today. He's a Morehouse man. He's a godly man. He's a leader. He's a teacher. And he's a preacher. I introduce you all to the Dr. Reverend Sam Logan. How you doing, sir?
Man, that is hilarious.
I'm trying to be Aaron Wiggins and Ray Jernigan all in one.
Man, that was too funny. Wow. I'm great, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. We're going to see how long we keep these kids quiet and have a conversation.
Yeah, man, let me tell you, you're doing an amazing job with the podcast, man. 757 Renaissance, man, is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it.
I'm trying to open people's eyes to not only our region, but a lot of the talent that we have. Like they say, it's something in the water.
Yeah, right.
And we have an incredible group of people that live down here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to get some, exposure to, because a lot of people I think that I interview fly under the radar sometimes.
Yeah. 757 is definitely a breeding ground for talent, and across the board, athletics, art, artistry, academics, medical advancements. I mean, we just got, of course, ministry, best choirs in the world, some of the most powerful preachers, in my opinion.
Yeah,
are here in the 757. So it's incredible place to be.
Yeah. So, what city did you grow up in?
Naughty by Norfolk, man. Born and raised in the city of Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah, where did you go to high school?
I am a Commodore, Morehouse High School. There are only 5 high schools in Norfolk. Only one really matters, and that's Morehouse High School.
So, how was Sam Logan as a high school student?
Man, Sam Logan was average on his best day as a high school student, which is ironic. Academically, I was definitely an average student. I flew under the radar. And it really wasn't until I was probably in my junior year that I had a teacher who really made me look at education differently. And start to take education seriously. Her name was Ruby Farrar-Lake. Her name is Ruby Farrar-Lake. She taught U.S. history, but she taught a course in U.S. history called Ethnic Studies.
Okay.
And it was U.S. history with an emphasis on minorities. And taking that class was eye-opening, and she invited me to be a part of her Black History Challenge team. That was really cool to do. And at that point, I started thinking, you know what, maybe my mom and dad are right about this education thing, and I probably need to take it more seriously. But of course, I wasn't a 3.0, student at that time. As a matter of fact, I didn't graduate as a 3.0 student, but I definitely had a different perspective on education after my junior year in high school.
It only takes one teacher.
Yeah, that's true.
It's always that one teacher that turns you around.
Yeah, absolutely. She's amazing. And we stay in contact. In fact, I had a question for her in February, and I called her and said, hey, I was just thinking about something. And, nobody knows history like you know history. What are your thoughts? And we had a great conversation. She and her husband are both incredible people.
Now, I know that you also have worked in the education system. Was she did she affect your decision to go into that field?
Believe it or not, she didn't.
Mm.
She did not. When I graduated from high school, I initially planned to go into business, like business administration, business management. And when I started college, that's what I planned to do. And probably during my first year in college, I switched from business to biology because I wanted to be an
Okay.
OB-GYN,
Okay.
like Cliff Huxtable, man.
All
I
right.
wanted to be one of the Huxtables, Daddy Huxtable. But after, going to that biology class, I was like, this is all overrated.
Mm.
And if the rest of majoring in biology is going to be like this, I'm not that dude.
Right.
So I thought about doing English, and I ended up double majoring in psychology and religion. Psychology because I've always been intrigued by people,
Mm.
and religion because I'm a church boy, born and raised, and I love it.
Right.
I've loved the church. And it was during my senior year that a friend of mine said, "Hey man, I know you need some money for school like I do. There is a scholarship being given to people who are interested in becoming educators.
Mm.
So we need to go get these coins." What I discovered is that I actually had to make a commitment to education
Mhm.
if they were to pay for my graduate degree. So that's how I ended up in education.
Did you ever teach, or did you stay in the counseling area?
I taught. I taught for three or 4 years,
Mhm.
and it was really interesting. I started as a counselor.
Mhm.
I was a counselor for about 4 years. Then I transitioned from the counseling office, from school counseling, into the classroom, and I taught for several years. Then, when I got married, we relocated, and I went back into school counseling in my new building.
What do you prefer, counseling or teaching?
It just depends on the day of the week,
Mhm.
to be very honest with you. I am passionate about both. I like the one on one piece of counseling. I love the group time, the classroom time
Mhm.
of being a teacher. I love to see minds opened. I love to see them, students just get it, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
I love to see those aha moments when they arise. Yeah.
So, okay, you said that you were an average student when you left high school.
Yeah,
How did you find your way to Morehouse?
man. So I was an average student. Like I said, I wasn't a 3.0, didn't have over 1,000 on the SAT. I found out about Morehouse when I did um, like a biography,
Mhm.
Black History Month papers that,
Mhm.
we've got to do every month.
Mhm.
When I did one on Martin Luther King Jr., I discovered that he went to Morehouse. And I thought, man, if he went to Morehouse, must be a good school. I'm going to give it a shot. And I applied, and much to my surprise, they accepted me.
Okay.
And for me, it was a toss up between Morehouse and Hampton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. It was a toss up between the two. I ended up at Morehouse because my grandmother started telling everybody I was going to Morehouse, and I didn't want to embarrass her, and I didn't want
Right.
to let her down. So I
Right.
was like, okay, well, that's what she's telling everybody. That's what I'm gonna do.
So when you graduated, was that to go the goal to definitely go to college, or did you have to kind of make up your mind that's what you want to do?
Yeah, so that was definitely the goal for me.
Mhm.
That there was no question for me about whether or not I would go. The question was just which one will you go to?
Okay.
My family has always been a huge proponent of education. Got to get your education. Got to get your education. Got to get your education. Specifically, and most especially, my father's mother.
Mhm.
They grew up in rural South Carolina, and she would often talk about she and my grandfather would often talk about what it was like to be sharecroppers
Mhm.
because they were early on in life sharecroppers. As they grew, things changed, more opportunities became available. But she would often say that as a child, she didn't have opportunity to go to school on good days, because
Right.
good days were reserved for working in the field. They could only go to school early in life when it was raining.
Mm-hmm.
And she would talk about how mean some of the kids who were on the way to school were. They were on the bus while she and her siblings would walk in, and they would throw things out of the bus window at them, hit them in the head, and all of that kind of stuff. And because she didn't have an opportunity to go, she was adamant about the fact that we took education seriously and did as much as we could to be the best students that we could possibly be. It didn't click for me though until I was in college.
Do you think now kids, children like our kids, do they have the reverence that we had coming up? Because it's easy for them to kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
It's always the opportunity has always been there, where we
Right.
have parents and grandparents who had to fight and struggle to get there. Do you think
Absolutely.
that there's a disconnect between the newer generation and our generation?
I do. I absolutely do. I think the farther you get away from a struggle, the less significant the struggle is. Right. And because, our children and our 12-year-olds, our 13-year-olds, our 14-year-olds are so far removed from the struggle just to go to schools, that had decent textbooks, and go to schools where racism, really was an issue, whether it was very apparent and out in the open, or whether racist policies were more, covert. Our kids just don't. And I'm generally speaking, this is a huge generalization, but for the most part, our kids just don't know that struggle. And because they don't have the struggle in the same way that we did, they kind of take for granted the fact that education has not always been there, and that they have an opportunity to do what many of their ancestors never had an opportunity to do.
And I think it's kind of weird because we're in a weird age where it seems like my kids won't even recognize the struggle.
Yeah.
But we're 40 years out, 50 years out from the Civil Rights Bill?
Sure.
That's not even a whole generation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So for me, that's why history is so important. We've got to teach it and teach it and teach it and teach it and teach it, so that our children don't forget that it happened. They may not have lived it, but they need to know that it did happen. And I also think it's important for us to ensure that our children have relationships with their elders, because you and I at this point, we can talk about things that happened in the 60s, and in the early 70s. But the reality is that wasn't our lived experience either.
Right.
We were born in the latter 70s. They need to be in conversation with their grandparents, and their great grandparents, and your great auntie and big mama, and pop. All of those people need to be a part of their experience, their day-to-day experience, as much as possible. And they need to tell the story, because we can give them the historical perspective through what we've read and what we've heard. But our ancestors, the generations before us, can give them the lived experience. And I think that's very different.
We're going to put a pin in that because we're going to go back to this when we start talking about church.
Okay. Yeah. Good stuff.
All right. So, Morehouse, once you got there, did you realize? All right. So, I'm biased against all HBCUs. Even though Norfolk State may be the best one, I'm a little biased to all of the Behold the Green Gold. I'm a little biased of all HBCUs. And I had an interesting upbringing where both my parents went to Hampton University. I have an aunt and an uncle that were tenured professors there, and they actually lived in a house on campus. And I spent a large part of my childhood, so much so I joke with a lot of people that I thought when people went to college, everybody went to Hampton University. Like it was the college, you know.
Yeah,
It
got that
was
pirate pride.
right. It was either Hampton or whoever Hampton played at the football game. But honestly, like until I got into start researching college for myself and got to my sophomore, junior year in high school,
Mhm.
other schools just didn't exist to me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it was no What's a Radford?
Right.
I didn't know about that. A JMU.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
saying nothing against these schools. They just
Right.
didn't. I was so involved in the HBCU culture. They just weren't
Sure.
in my atmosphere
Absolutely.
at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And Morehouse has a great reputation far as education and discipline and all of the graduates of Morehouse. Once you got there, did you feel like you were on hollow ground?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. There is definitely something special about Morehouse. There is no other college in the country that is exclusively designed to exclusively train the minds and the hearts of Black men.
Mm-hmm.
There's something special about that. With all of the statistics about, Black men, they're not graduating from high school. Man, all of the negatives that are said about us. To be in a place where there are 3,000 guys who look like you, who have goals, visions, dreams, aspirations, and all of that kind of stuff. There is something special. I dare say there's something sacred about that space, man.
Yeah.
That definitely made it hollow ground for me. And then to hear consistently names like Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson, Benjamin Elijah Mays, Howard Thurman, the list just goes on and on and on of great men who have either taught at Morehouse or who are Morehouse men themselves. There was definitely something empowering, something encouraging, and something challenging about that. Yeah, it was an amazing experience.
Now I know that Morehouse is an all-male school, and Spelman is right across the way from Morehouse.
Amen.
When you when you were at Morehouse, was it very obvious? Because I hear now like sometimes they cross register in classes and things. So was it obvious that you were in an all-male school?
It was in terms of dorm assignments. It was in terms of who's in the cafeteria with you. Outside of that, there was a lot of commingling. As a matter of fact, I cross-registered. I took a class at Spelman, and we had some Spelmanites, Spelman sisters in our classes at Morehouse. And then we did quite a bit together, social events, athletics, the cheerleaders from Morehouse come from Spelman. When we talk about things like, balls and coronations and all of that good stuff, the Spelman-Morehouse relationship is very real and it's very strong.
So what made you come back? Why didn't you stay in Atlanta?
Man, I was done.
Okay.
I've been there 4 years, and I didn't think that there was anything else in Atlanta for me.
Okay.
And I actually, the program that I mentioned that led me to education required that I apply to several different graduate schools. And one of the schools on the list was the College of William and Mary.
Okay.
And I applied to it because it was the closest school on the list to home. I got accepted there, but I also got accepted to Columbia University, to Teachers College. And at the time, Teachers College was #1 in the country for education. So for me, it was a no-brainer, like go to Teachers College. The same year though, January of my senior year in college, my grandmother passed away. And when my grandmother passed away, it made me feel like I needed to be closer to home.
Right.
Because my grandfather was a pastor. He also had Parkinson's. And I didn't feel good about living in New York when I could be here in the 757, helping my granddad.
So that means you're third generation preacher.
So really, my dad is the minister of music,
Okay.
but not a preacher in the preacher sense.
Okay.
But so my granddad was a pastor. My great grandfather on my mother's side was a minister as well. So I've got a plethora of preachers, in my family.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So now
Sure.
we got to get into some personal business.
Okay.
How did the Morehouse man meet the Hampton University woman?
Man, she would not stop stalking me, dude. I was like, yo,
She gonna see this, right?
No, man. The truth is that we worked together. We worked together at the same high school. And funny story, we were going on a field trip, and she sat in front of me on the bus. It was a college tour, a major college tour. We were taking students from Newport News to Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi to tour. Yeah, man, we toured Tulane, Xavier, all kinds of schools, University of Alabama, Birmingham. Just had a good time, with the kids, exposing them to different things. And she talked. Yeah, and we had a good conversation.
Okay.
And she kept on talking, right? and it was a good conversation. And when we got back, she texted just to make sure I made it home. And I thought, man, that's pretty nice. And then we would text from time to time. And one day she said, what are you doing this weekend? And my response was, coming to see you, hopefully. And that opened the door of opportunity.
I see the Morehouse shine there. I see it.
And and from that day forward, 17 years later, still together.
Nice. So at this time, were you already working in ministry?
I was.
Okay.
I was. Yep, I was already involved, heavily involved, in fact, in ministry.
So how do you, I don't want to say break it to you, but when you're a minister and you're dating, is it weird? Like, everything's going good, and then you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a minister. And they be like, dun, dun, dun.
So it wasn't weird because it wasn't anything that I tried to hide. It was always a conversation about who I am and what I do. In fact, one of the earliest experiences she had with me was going to visit Rose of Sharon, United Holy Church, Nancy Parkway, Suffolk. Yeah, so you can appreciate that, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That building has brought up a lot of us, man.
Yeah, it was for a YPHA event. Yeah, she was with me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let's get into ministry. How long? So now, all transparency, you are the pastor of the church that I attend, and you are my personal pastor. Let's talk about the road that got you into being a pastor. Did you start out wanting to be a pastor, or were you good with just being a minister?
Man, I was so good. I was so good with just being a minister. I even went to seminary, but the purpose for me going to seminary was so that I could be a strong Christian educator, Sunday school teacher, director of Christian education. I was an elder in the church, and I just thought the seminary was a good idea so I could be more informed, as a preacher, as a teacher, and all of that kind of stuff. And I was so very happy doing all of that. And specifically, I ended up at New Hope because Pastor Guns, Frank Guns, shout out Frank Guns, one of the most insightful, wise, practical, relevant, thinking 90-plus-year-old man that I know. He's incredible. He was in his 80s at that time, and he was serving as the interim pastor of New Hope. And he asked someone who is a mutual friend for the name of somebody who may come and speak on a Sunday. And she said, call Sam. And Pastor Guns called. And because I'm from Norfolk, and Pastor Guns pastored in Norfolk for over 30 years, hearing that Frank Guns called my name was like, whoa.
He's looking for you.
Yeah, right. And and when he calls, you have to respond, right? Not that he was a gangster, but just that the level of respect that I had for him.
You don't want to play with anybody that can just have a constant conversation with the Lord.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man. And he and his wife, 2 people I ain't messing around with, right?
No. They got the direct line. They got the bat line right to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So funny story, I guess. He called. I went to the church, and the chairman of the deacons ministry at the time was Deacon Cogdell.
Okay.
And he and Trustee George Williams, who is going to be with the Lord now, they said, this church is looking for a pastor. We want to know if you will submit your resume. And I was like, nah, man, I'm good. I'm good. Like, I have no interest in this. As a matter of fact, I went back and told my pastor that, hey, they're asking me to do it, but I'm not going to do it because I'm not interested. I don't want to be a pastor. And to be very transparent, Sean, I'd never been Baptist before, right? So the conversation was not only, I don't want to be a pastor, but if I am going to be a pastor, I'm not going to be a Baptist one. Right.
Barney was trying to out you the other day when I was talking to her.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Pentecostal holiness, born and raised, and that was my intention to live that way.
Baptist and Pentecostal are like church cousins, though.
Absolutely.
It all depends. I think it all depends on what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, right. Very true. Very, very, very true. And long story short, man, one thing led to another. And I told my pastor that I would go through the process, just like submitting the resume, interviewing, because I'd never done it before. Just kind of intrigued about what the process would look like. Little did I know that the result of the process would be Deacon Cogdell and the search committee, taking my name to the church for a vote, and the church voting yes. And I remember the night Deacon Cogdell called me, and he said, I got good news for you, Reverend Logan. I said, what's that? He said, you just got elected to be the new pastor of New Hope Baptist Church if you want it. I was like, really? Wow. Okay, can I call you back?
Right.
I need to go. I need to go have a whole lot of conversations about this, because this is going to be different. This is going to be different on a whole lot of levels. But it has been an absolute joy. And when I say a joy, man, it has been a joy, a pleasure, a thrill, an honor to be the pastor of New Hope.
Now, do you think watching your grandfather work in the church influenced you and helped you shape your pastorship?
Sometimes right now, I listen to myself speak and I hear his words coming out of my mouth. Absolutely. He was absolutely the most significant spiritual influence on my spiritual life and my understanding of who pastors are and what pastors are called to be and to do. No doubt about it.
So did it help you understand? Because a lot of people don't realize church is every day. Church just isn't Sunday. And there's a lot it takes to run a church that people don't see, like the light bill and, taxes. Well, not really taxes, but any kind of utilities, maintenance.
And there
expanding.
There are IRS concerns.
Expanding your church and little things like how I want to say this, listing all your church members and being able to reach them effectively.
Yeah.
Seeing it from the inside out, did that assist you
Mhm.
growing up?
It did. It absolutely did. It was very, very helpful. But what also helped me though was experience in. I've only been a part of three churches. My granddad's church is where I was raised. My church when I was in Atlanta, and I should say in leadership in three churches.
Mhm.
The church where I was raised, and the church that I attended in Atlanta while I was in college, and then Holy Temple Church in Chesapeake. And being a part of each one of those churches added something to the fabric
Mhm.
of who I am. So when we talk about the administrative side, business side of church, much of what I learned regarding that aspect of the ministry, I learned from Pastor Stephen Pierce at Holy Temple Church. He was an accountant by profession and also the pastor.
Mhm.
And I learned about a church budget from watching him, from listening to him. I learned about accountability from watching him and listening to him. I learned about the importance of being detail oriented and disciplined with regard to those things. So watching him and listening to him.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how did the family take the news? And part two
Uh,
to that question, since
yeah.
you've been a pastor, how do you think that's affected your family, especially the kids?
Wow. Wow, man. These are great questions, especially coming from a PK himself,
I know
right?
where to go.
Yeah. So initially, my family was absolutely excited. I don't think any of them were surprised
Mhm.
that it was the direction that my life was taking. Many of them will say, even now, I mean, everybody could see this but you,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
We knew this is what God was doing. You just were late to the game.
Right.
So for them, it was no big deal. When I started pastoring, though, I started at New Hope in 2009, and it was a lot going on. My wife and I were married in 2006. My son was born in 2007. Twin girls were born in 2008. I started pastoring in 2009. Those are all major life changing events.
Mhm.
And for me, they were literally happening about 12 months apart, married in July '06, son born August '07, twins born September '08, starting at New Hope in August '09. It's like, whoa, bam, 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 bam.
Mhm.
When do you catch your breath? When do you have an opportunity to say, wait a minute, there's a lot going on? And then when I started pastoring, I wasn't full time
Mhm.
in ministry. So I had at home um, children who were 3 or 4 months old, two children 3 or 4 months old, a son who was about 15, our oldest daughter who was 9. My wife, we'd only been married for about 3 years. I was also working full time in the school system. And now I come into a situation where I'm the pastor, the 32-year-old pastor of a 90-year-old church,
Mhm.
right? Where the congregational age was probably mid 70s
Mhm.
at the time. The average congregational, the average age of the congregation was probably mid 70s. So I'm trying to juggle all of this stuff. And God was gracious,
Mhm.
God was kind, and God blessed and gave me wisdom with a lot of stuff. I also think that I probably could have done and should have done a much better job with my family during those earlier years,
Mhm.
right? And that's a bold confession. It's a clear acknowledgement of the fact that I don't feel like I did as well as I could have. Um, just because, in addition to trying to learn, my own children and raise my own children, I was also trying to learn the church
Mhm.
that was a different kind of baby to me,
Mhm.
right? That I'm also trying to nurture and trying to develop. But this baby talks back.
Mhm.
This baby has a mind of its own. Everybody in this crib doesn't agree,
Mhm.
with everything. So there are those challenges. And then, of course, I've got a wife and we've only been married for 3 years. So I'm still trying to figure out how to be not just a husband, but specifically be her husband.
Do you
So
think it was a point where, as a man, you were trying to take on too much, and God kind of had to be like, "That's not what I told you to do."
so I never had that. That's not what I told you to do experience. Um, I didn't. I'll tell you what happened though in the transition where God did speak.
Okay.
I was at work one day and I was on the way to my office, walking down the hallway, and I said, "Man, I'm tired." And the next thing I said was, "I need to leave this job so I can focus on New Hope Baptist Church."
Mm-hmm.
And as clear as day, the Lord spoke to me and said, "I'll take care of you."
Mm-hmm.
I went to my office. I emailed my wife and told her I'm about to quit my job.
Mm.
Like 60 seconds later, the phone rang. you know, but long story short, I did, and I quit without telling the church that I was quitting
Mm-hmm.
because it was a leap of faith that I needed to take.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to be confident that the God who said he would take care of me would take care of me, whether the church agreed to the decision or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the way the church discovered that I quit was that I started showing up during the day, during the middle of the week. And Trustee Williams, who was the chair of the trustee ministry at the time, he noticed that my car was there more frequently. So he went to Deacon Cogdale, who was the chair of the deacons ministry, said, "Hey, as a pastor, is he still working? Because he up here a lot." And Deacon Cogdale came to me and asked me if I was still working. I said, "No, I'm not.
Okay.
I quit so I can focus on this." He said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, man." And God has been faithful. God has absolutely been faithful because that's what God does, and that's who God is.
So I try to always ask a major question in each one of my episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And my major question to you is, and it's kind of piggybacks on what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when God is truly speaking to you? And
Yeah.
before you answer that, I want to say I've been church kid all my life,
Mm-hmm.
in and out, choir rehearsal, um, leadership meeting,
Yeah.
men's day,
Yeah.
women's day, missionary
Right.
Sunday, revival, the revival of the revival.
Sure.
Yeah, brotherhood early in the morning. Back in the day,
Right.
they used to do it like 7 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and you had to go to brother. But I used to go because the ladies that supported the brotherhood used to always make breakfast. So it was a chance for me. My dad would be like, "Come on, son, time to brotherhood. You want to go to church?" And I would be like, and he'd be like, "Breakfast," and I'd be like, "Okay," because I knew that's at least an 8 hour church day. Because you had brotherhood in the morning, you had the breakfast, then you had Sunday school, and
Yes, sir.
then from Sunday school you had to go straight to service, and
Yeah.
then we gotta go to see visit another church.
Yeah.
Let's get on the bus.
It was definitely the Lord's day.
Right. So
Right.
with that said, I could I've clocked many church hours,
Mm-hmm.
and I can honestly say I've had the Lord speak to me 3 times in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
and he doesn't have to speak all the time. And I
Right.
think sometimes he chooses when he wants to speak to you.
Absolutely.
And I know without a doubt it was him speaking to me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how would you explain that to a non PK? How do you
Sure.
know when it's truly the Lord speaking to you?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think that the Lord speaks in several different ways, right? I remember when I was about 14 or 15 and I had the same question. And I asked my grandmother, she told me to pray.
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Pray and ask the Lord to speak to you. And when he does, you'll know it." And so I did. And at the time, I was working as a paper boy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy story, but I was working as a paper boy. And it was one afternoon, I was riding my bike, tossing papers. I got to this condo and I got off my bike and I started up the steps. And something said to me, don't stop here. Go finish the rest of the route, then come back and do this last. Mm-hmm. And I shrugged it off, like, whatever, that doesn't make any sense. This is what I do every day. Mm-hmm. Mine's playing tricks on me, right? So I took the paper upstairs, started slinging them to third floor, came down second floor, first floor. And when I got back down to the ground, there were two guys riding away on my bicycle, right? Mm-hmm. One was on the handlebars, the other one was pedaling away, looking back at me laughing. Mm-hmm. And I was hot, man. I was mad. I got my newspapers. This is my job, the whole 9 yards. But as I was walking home, of course, because I had no bike, mm-hmm. I started laughing and thinking to myself, now I know what it's like in part for the Lord to speak. Because I thought that, the earth, like a scene from a movie, mm-hmm. the earth would stop, the heaven would split, right. Lights would come down. Yeah. Absolutely. And it wasn't that at all. It was just a still, small, persistent voice, mm-hmm. Giving clear direction. Mm-hmm. So that's the way the Lord speaks sometimes. Sometimes it's just a matter of opening the scriptures, and seeing what the Bible has to say, because we believe that all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable, mm-hmm. right, for teaching and for training and for correction and instruction in righteous living. So sometimes God just speaks through the Bible. Sometimes God speaks through other people, through, sometimes the most random people, the most unsuspecting folks, mm-hmm. Come up to you and start to have a conversation, and suddenly, they're really speaking to you, giving you divine direction of some sort. So I think God just has a way of revealing God's will to us in a variety of ways.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Spoken like a true Morehouse man.
That's funny.
So now that, all right, one last subject we got to talk about. Uh-huh. We have just went through the most incredible year ever with the whole COVID thing, and it changed a lot. Mm-hmm. It changed industries. It's changed the way kids go to school, and it's especially churches.
Sure.
What was your biggest challenge adjusting to the new, I guess we say the new norm?
Yeah. Wow, man, that's an excellent question. So on the church front, the biggest adjustment for me was not being with you all. Mm-hmm. Right. The biggest adjustment was me going to church regularly and nobody being there. Mm-hmm. It was preaching to an empty sanctuary, nothing but a camera and empty pews, and a guy in the Sid Foster in the AV booth, right? That was major.
So did that make you have to change your rhythm, the whole way you went about your sermons?
Yeah, so absolutely. Because we as a people, are very engaging, mm-hmm. In our worship experience. This call and response, mm-hmm. is a part of our worship experience. In our church, as it is in most Black churches, the preacher typically doesn't preach by himself. Right. He's preaching, but other people are saying, amen, thank you, Jesus, hallelujah. Mm-hmm. That's right. I know that's right. Take your time, say it again.
And if you're real lucky, you got to Miss Hines.
Thank you.
Right. All right, so let me ask you this: as a pastor, when you're in it and you're like, boy, I'm hooping now, I'm getting it. Does Miss Hines egg you on? Does that put you in your second gear?
Bruh, I've got to be honest and tell you that there is something affirming about hearing her holler. It's like, Lord, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. And really it just says somebody hears the word, somebody is connecting with the word, somebody is receiving the word and they're affirming it, they're confirming it. And that's important. That's important because I don't think anyone, any pastor wants to preach and at the end of the sermon not know that somebody's life has been positively impacted. So for me, that's been very different as a result of COVID and quarantine and our physical distancing. The other thing that's been really challenging for me, and this has been more challenging than the preaching piece, again, has been the physical distance. When people have died, and early on, people died, and I wasn't able to go to their house.
Yeah.
That did something to me. I remember the first sister we had that passed away during COVID. When her sister called, it was about 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I immediately set up and I started getting dressed. I'm like, I'm coming over. And she said, Pastor, we got this coronavirus and this COVID stuff going on. You're not supposed to come over here. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I got to though. Like, I can't.
That's part of your duty.
She's a member of our church. You're a member of our church. Her daughter's a member of our church. I love your family. I can't not be there. So I said, well, I'm just going to get in the car and I'm just going to drive down your street and just going to sit, outside and just kind of be there from a distance. And then she said, no, Pastor, please don't do that. You don't have to do it. But not being able to do that, not being able to be with people who are in the hospital, about to breathe their last breath, that the pastor side of me grieved and still grieves to a certain extent, not being able to do that.
All right, so we're getting ready to wrap it up because I got more questions, but I want to save it so we can have a part 2.
Yeah.
So now as a pastor, and it seems like we're not like they always try to say over the hump. We're not quite over the hump yet. But what do you see for the future of the church after the pandemic?
That is an excellent question.
And I don't mean just our church. I mean churches in general.
Yeah. I think I see a major shift in the way worship happens and in the way fellowship takes place. I honestly don't know that churches will have the same attendance that we had pre-pandemic. And I say that because virtual worship services have made things so much easier and more accessible to people.
Yes.
And if the congregation continues to live stream, there will be those who will say, listen, I worked Monday through Friday. My children had stuff to do all day Saturday. Sunday is the only day that I get to, have some downtime. I'm going to worship, but I'm going, instead of going to 1317 Gus Lane, I'm going to wehavenewhope.org.
So do you think before this all happened, it was almost like a stigma that if you don't go to church, you're not getting your Jesus? So now that kind of opens it up where you don't necessarily have to be in a building, but that doesn't have to necessarily cheapen your worship experience either.
Yeah. I think it's true. I think it's also going to come with a certain set of challenges, though, because the other thing that, COVID has taught us is that worship is important and your personal relationship with God is important, but fellowship with other people is important as well. The thing about the Christian faith and the Christian community is that the Christian community has never been about isolation and individualism. That's some Americanized version, of Christianity that's not biblical and it's not right. Christianity has always been about community. If we go back to the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 2, the first the first century church was all about coming together, and they came together
Mm-hmm.
every day, and they ate together, and they prayed together, and they worshiped together, and they had fun together, and they just enjoyed doing life together. And when we don't have that, that camaraderie, when we don't have that fellowship, when we're not able to be together like that, it weakens a part of who we are, because it's hard. It's hard to know that you're a Christian when you're never connected to other people,
Mm-hmm.
because the truth is that sometimes it is by dealing with other people that you see how Christian you really
Right,
are
right.
or are not.
They'll make you
Yeah,
choose your side sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's going to be challenging. I think that churches absolutely have to figure out the best way to meet the needs of both those who will be present in the sanctuary as well as those who will be present via the live stream. I mean, you shared with me last Sunday that we had people from out of the country who are part of our worship experience. And these are not people I texted, and said, hey, man, I know you're in Africa, but,
Yeah.
meet us on live. These are people that we do not know.
Yeah. Somebody
And
reached
this,
out to me from Glasgow, Scotland.
yeah,
And
there
first of
you
all,
go.
I was like, whoa, you saw us
Yeah.
all the way from Scotland. And the
Yeah.
second, I was like, there are black people in Scotland.
Right. And so because our reach has expanded, as a result of us being online in the ways that we are, we certainly don't want to pull back from that. At this point, by the grace of God, most churches have a worldwide ministry because we're on the World Wide Web, right?
Right.
And if you're reaching people all over the world, you want to continue to do it, and you want to continue to do it well. How do we do that? I think that's the question that many churches are going to have to answer.
All right, one last conspiracy theory question.
Okay.
Do you think that this may have been part of God's greater plan to, because it seems really opposite. You have a pandemic, everything shuts down, but the word of the Lord and church is brought into people's homes, and in a strange way is even more accessible than it was before.
Yeah. I want to be very careful in how I answer that, because millions of people have died as a result of the pandemic. And I don't want to say that God let millions of people die so I can go online.
Right.
Right. I will say that there have been both blessings and burdens resulting from COVID-19. And one of the blessings is that the word of God has a farther reach, in many different ways. The Bible, and our worship services and our preaching and our teaching and our ministry in the community, all of that kind of stuff is definitely reaching people in ways that we didn't imagine we would be able to reach them. I think that there are also burdens, though, that have come with the pandemic. So some people are struggling with really the question that you asked indirectly, which is why? Why COVID-19? Why the coronavirus? Why a worldwide pandemic? Why this? Why here? Why now? And that I can't answer. I can't answer. I don't know the why, but I do know that God is still in control of everything. And if I could answer the reasons why about everything that God did, God would no longer be God. I would be God because I would know everything that there is to know about it.
Right.
So I have grown, which is going to sound real strange, probably like very ironic or an oxymoron, but man, I have grown to a place of maturity that lets me be okay and in fact appreciate that there are some things about God that my human mind is too finite to understand.
Right.
You know, God is bigger than me, and I'm okay with that.
Hey, we're going to end it off like that.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been my conversation with the good Reverend Dr. Morehouse man.
Hilarious, man.
Sam Logan.
Man, it's been a joy to be with you, man.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, man. We got to do this more often. I got more questions.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna pose it to my listeners. I want to see what they want to ask you.
Oh, yeah. That would be awesome.
And then I want to have a church boys symposium.
Yeah, man. Just get the right church boys. It will live.
Yes.
That podcast will live.
All right, sir. I want to thank you for taking your time out this evening. And
thank you for the invitation.
No problem. I'll see you soon. Oh, before we go, how can people reach you? How can they get in contact with you and the church?
You can reach me on social media, all platforms. No, not all platforms. Just Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sam Logan III, Sam Logan, the Roman numeral 3. And our church website is wehavenewhope.org. We're also New Hope Baptist Church on Facebook and New Hope Baptist Church on YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you, sir, for spending time with us this evening. And we will holler back at you again.
All right. Have a great one. Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.